Alright, so today I want to go over the 12 things that you should do if your snake escapes its enclosure. And let me tell you, as a reptile keeper, you are 100% responsible for keeping your snakes contained in a secure enclosure. Let me tell you, sometimes things can go wrong and they can actually get out. As a matter of fact, I lost a few snakes over the last few years. Luckily, I found them all except one. I had one tiny little king snake, probably no bigger around than the size of a pencil. Probably even skinnier than that, and who knows where that thing went. It was so small, I'm sure it got into some little crook or cranny somewhere, and I lost that thing for good. It's been a couple years, never did find that snake. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over the 12 steps that you should do if you lose a snake. Alright, so the first thing that you should do if your snake escapes is to make sure that your snake has actually escaped. As a matter of fact, I've had some king snakes in the past, and I kept them in these tubs behind me. This is an ARS 5040 rack. This is a really good size for kind of mid-sized king snakes. I actually had some king snakes in there, and there's several times when I would open the tubs and I was like, oh my goodness, the snake is gone, and come to find out the snake would actually burrow in the substrate. It was actually underneath the substrate. So the first thing you should do is actually dig through your substrate, look around the entire enclosure, and make sure 100% that your snake is actually missing before you panic. Alright, so the number 2 thing, assuming that your snake has actually gotten out of the enclosure, number 2 is remove any sticky traps that you have in your house. Now let me tell you, I put quite a few sticky traps to trap all the insects here in my reptile room. As a matter of fact, I started keeping some critters that eat crickets, and it seems like the crickets are always getting out and running around my whole house, and I have sticky traps everywhere. And if you have a snake that gets out, the first thing you want to do is run around and pick up and remove those sticky traps. The last thing you want is a snake caught up in one of those glue traps. So the number 3 thing I would recommend as you are looking around for the snake, I would seal up any escape routes. So for example, if you have like a doggy door or an open door, something like that that leads to the outside, you definitely don't want your snakes going out of the house. They would be almost impossible to find if they got out of the house. And what I would actually do is, especially if you had like a really tiny, skinny king snake, something that could squeeze through vents or something like that, probably what I would do is I get some of the blue painter's tape that is easily removable, and I tape up all the vents, probably stick towels under the doors, and just go around and seal off all of the escape routes as you're going around looking for that snake. As a matter of fact, I have an unfinished part of my basement here that is attached to my reptile room. As a matter of fact, it's unfinished right underneath the stairs. And I'm thinking that little snake that I lost probably went underneath my stairs and then back behind the wall. There's actually a separate, like 2x4s on the drywall that's separate from the concrete sides of the walls, and it can actually get back behind the walls if it crawled through there. So probably what I should have done right away as soon as I lost that snake, I probably should have run around and sealed all the escape routes. Alright, so the number 4 thing is I would check around all the hot spots. And there's quite a few hot spots around your house. As a matter of fact, if you look underneath like the water heater, there's a little pilot light usually under your water heater that's nice and toasty warm. Perfect place for a snake to kind of curl up and hide. And under your refrigerators and under your freezers, I know the inside of the fridge and freezer is really cold, but underneath there's actually a compressor that stays nice and toasty warm. A perfect place for a snake to hide. I would definitely check under there first and make sure you cover all the hot spots. Alright, so number 5 is I would actually look in confined spaces. So any place that's really confined, I would actually look around, like for example, in little cubby holes, maybe in a backpack. You know, if you have like a bag open on the floor, the snake could crawl inside, and they really like confined, dark places to kind of hang out. So I'd definitely check all the spots, you know, like inside your guitar, anything like that. I would actually look all around the house in the small confined spaces for your snake. All right, so number 6, I would probably start thinking like a snake. That's what I'd probably do. And when you think like a snake, you think about reticulated pythons, you think about ball pythons. And usually if you pull out like a reticulated python, which is a little bit different, sometimes they can be really big. And especially if you got a juvenile reticulated python, I would think a lot of times retics like to go up. And ball pythons, corn snakes, and a lot of colubrids like to go down. So it's kind of interesting. You pull out a reticulated python and it's always reaching up for the trees, for the higher ground. And the ball pythons and the king snakes are always going down. So for example, if you lost a snake kind of on the main floor and you had stairs going up, stairs going down, I would think if you had a reticulated python, you'd probably have a good probability that that snake might climb up the stairs, versus if you had like a ball python like Bobby here around my neck, he would probably go down the stairs into the basement. Kind of think like a snake. All right, so number 7 is you can actually try to use reptile hides to trap your snake. And it doesn't really trap them in permanently. Essentially what it does is it gives them a small, dark enclosure to actually go into and hide and feel comfortable. So if a snake's crawling around in the open, on the floor, it feels really exposed. And a lot of times I would say, in most cases, snakes, what they'll do is they'll pretty much go in a straight line until they hit a wall. And then they'll go pretty much in the corner of the walls and kind of creep up along the corners. And if you actually took some of these like rectangular hides that you can get at, for example, Reptile Basics, you could actually get some pretty big hides and then put them in strategic locations around your house. And then hopefully if your snake starts cruising around, you could actually get him into the hide. So then every few hours you could go around and check all the hides to see if he comes out and then ends up going into one of those hides. All right, so number 8, I would actually look for your snake after the lights go out. I would look for the snake in the dark. And this is especially true with nocturnal snakes like ball pythons. So ball pythons, mostly they will sleep during the day. And if they do come out, they'll probably look for a hide and then coil up in the hide. But at nighttime, a lot of times the ball pythons will be most active, and they'll actually come out and start cruising around. So what I would actually do is turn on all the lights, and maybe every hour or so, flip on all the lights and look in the middle of the room and see if that snake is actually coming out and crawling around in the middle of the night. All right, so number 9 is you want to be kind of a snake detective. You think like a detective when you're hunting snakes, and that is you're looking for things that are knocked over. And this is especially true with my big reticulated python. Let me tell you, when my retics are out, they just knock over everything. So if you come into the room and there's just stuff knocked all over the place, just kind of just a complete disaster, you know a big reticulated python was out and about in that room. So what I would actually do is maybe you could probably even set stuff up around the room that is easily knocked over, and then you can, when you're on your hunt for your snake, you can actually look around for things that have been knocked over by that snake, and you know that snake has been in the area if things are knocked over. All right, so number 10, here is the trick, especially with ball pythons. You can actually turn on your TV and hypnotize your ball python. As a matter of fact, I've heard quite a few people that say they actually free roam their snakes on purpose. They'll actually take their snake out and just let it run around the house, and they'll turn on the TV, and especially with ball pythons, they'll sit in front of the TV and just watch TV for hours at a time. It just kind of hypnotizes your ball python. One trick, especially with ball pythons, turn on the TV and hypnotize them. All right, so number 11, once you find your snake, you actually should go back to the enclosure and figure out how that snake actually escaped. And that was my problem when I lost my snake. As a matter of fact, I had 2 tiny little king snakes. They were the little tiny black and white ones, super tiny little hatchlings, and I actually put them in too big of a tub. And one of them got out, and I was thinking, I don't know how this got out. I must have left it open, or he must have just kind of jumped out when I was in there spot cleaning or something like that. And I put him back in, not realizing that he was actually able to escape. I didn't really sit down and figure out how this snake actually got out of the tub, and that was my big mistake, because I actually found him out and about right in the middle of the room, and I was like, this is kind of weird. I found this snake in the middle of the room. I want to put him back in his tub. I put him back in, and sure enough, he escaped the same way the second time, and that's when I lost him for good. You definitely want to know how the snake is getting out. All right, so number 12 is you want to consider upgrading your snake enclosure. And let me tell you, if you have some really big snakes like reticulated pythons or boas or something like that, they have a really long reach and they have incredible power. If you ever handled one of these big snakes, you'll know how powerful they are. They can definitely surprise you. And let me tell you, a lot of people are surprised when that snake can actually pop off the lid of your enclosure. So what I would actually recommend is getting an enclosure that is specific for your type of snake. And I actually just upgraded Lucy about a year ago. She pretty much outgrew these boa tubs. She's on my pool table in a 6-foot enclosure. The problem is with upgrading your enclosure is it can be extremely expensive. That enclosure that I actually bought for her with the heat and the lighting and everything, the thermostat, the entire enclosure cost me about $1,000. So when you're thinking about upgrading the enclosure, it can be extremely costly. Although you don't want a big 17-foot, 90-pound reticulated python out and about, you definitely want to secure an animal like that. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Nah I'm Good asks, have I ever been bitten by a reticulated python? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, when Sonny was small, he used to try to bite me a lot. He is my super dwarf reticulated python. He was only about the size of a hatchling. I've never been bitten by him, and thank goodness I have never been bitten by an adult reticulated python. Now, let me tell you, if you actually get bit by a retic, especially an adult, a lot of times you will need stitches and staples and have to go to the hospital. It is a really big deal. You definitely don't want to get bit by a reticulated python. That is why you really want to have experience handling big snakes. I'd say it's probably one of the most dangerous things here. I'm not really worried about snakes choking me out that much. You know, a lot of people say, you know, especially with Bobby here, that they're worried that he's going to choke me out. He could choke me a little bit, but I have the strength to actually get him off of my neck. The biggest fear that I have here in my snake collection is actually taking a bite by one of my big reticulated pythons. See, Bobby's like, could choke me out again. That's pretty minor compared to what a reticulated python could do. Let me tell you, those snakes are no joke. You definitely want a second person, and you definitely want to treat them with respect. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.